Well, shalom and welcome. We are still actually at the end of the Scotland deputation, heading back to the office. Today finds us in the beautiful city of York, but it also finds us on the day of Simchat Torah. Now, this time last year was on the fateful attack by Hamas on Simchat Torah. And so today, Jewish people are making links in the last year. What has happened in the last year? How are things going? How is their families, etc. For some people, their world crashed and they are still trying to rebuild. For others, the nervousness and the uncertainty has been replaced with passion and zeal to defend their homeland, but also perhaps with some uncertainty over their children who may, like ours, be serving, defending the state. Now, the beginning and ending of the cycle and rhythm of life in the Jewish calendar finishes and starts today. Its ending began on Rosh Hashanah, and it was this long ending, sort of quite a drawn out process. The Torah portion finished on Rosh Hashanah and began again. And yet, before it begins again, you get a variety of readings and holidays and festivals. So on Rosh Hashanah, you read Genesis 22, and on Yom Kippur, you read Jonah chapter 2, and during the 10 days of awe, they throw in some various parts from the prophets for you to read and contemplate. And then, of course, leaps straight in from Yom Kippur into Sukkot. And in Sukkot, it was Ecclesiastes. But now Simchat Torah literally means the joy of receiving the Torah. It is the 8th day of the festival of Sukkot. And the beginning and ending cycle starts afresh with readings from the book of Genesis. Now, Genesis is absolutely packed with meaning, and especially the first 11 chapters. Why? Because there's so much that are condensed within it. The book of Genesis opens with 7 words. Right? The first sentence has 7 words, and that pattern of 7 immediately is going to be reflected in creation and the cycle and rhythm of a week and of life, and of course the Sabbath, which is the queen of festivals, so that every 7 days you're going to be having this time of rest in which to reflect on the week ahead. Spend time with family and your God. Spend time in the Word, learning and being refreshed, both spiritually and physically. So the Bible starts, as most of us already know, Bereshit, in the beginning. And for Jewish people, you just look at the very first word and start asking questions. Remember, we're closer to God when we're asking questions than when we think that we actually have answers. And so what's the first question? Why does the Bible start with a B? Surely, if you're the Word of God and you are divine, then the Word of God should start with an Aleph, because that's the first letter of the alphabet. If you're going to start something first, if this is going to be the first thing that ever happens in the world, then surely it must be an Aleph. And so Jewish sages contemplate this for a while, and they think, why does the Bible start with a B? What am I missing? Surely it should start with an Aleph. And what's a midrash? Well, there's a midrash on this. In fact, there's a great midrash on all of the first 5 books called Midrash Rabbah. It's a collection of all the sayings, all the thoughts, all the disagreements, all the various readings of first 5 books of the Bible. And then it expands out to include all the other 5 scrolls that you read through the year, like Ecclesiastes and Jonah and Song of Songs and such. And in the Midrashim, which are stories which are not true, but they contain truths, they say, well, actually, the Bible does start with an Aleph. You just can't see it. What are these crazy sages saying? I hear you ask. It's a good question. Well, they say, when you look at the scrolls, when you actually pick up a scroll and look at it, yes, our eyes automatically want to start reading letters, but look at the scroll. What do you see? You see black letters on a white background or a colored background. Often parchments are faded now, so they're more sort of sepia color. But black letters on a white background. And so the sages, this is also reflected in Qumran, by the way, which was about 100 years prior to Jesus. They say, look at the text. You'll see black letters, but you'll see white spaces. And those white spaces are also letters. You just can't read them. They are the Aleph, they would say. What are these sages saying? They're saying that there is the letter of the Torah and there is also the spirit of the Torah, which you see in the epistles, where Paul says, what's really more important is the spirit of the law, more than the letter of the law. And that is something that Jewish sages have already been contemplating, because Paul being quite Jewish in his Jewish world, they would say, yes, there's something mysterious here, something I acknowledge that I don't know, but I believe that it is there. I've got to go deeper into the text to try and get behind the words to actually see that the Torah of what God actually gave the world. There's no reason for creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, but there was no reason. It doesn't say in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth because he was bored. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He lost a bet. Okay, there's no reason for any of this. And so you have to make up your own reason, don't you? If there's no reason, you can just say, yep, God created the heavens and the earth, and that's it, which kind of makes him aloof from his creation, uninvolved, there's no emotion. But actually, the Jewish people want to find emotion in everything God does. And they know that he's an emotional being. Why? Because we have emotions. If we're made in his image, then he also has emotions as we have emotions. He's in better control of his emotions than we are, but he has that. He gets angry, he loves, he gets sad, he weeps, he sings for joy. He gets jealous. He has all those emotions. But also, because he's God, he has them in the highest of forms. So creation is an act of love. There was no need for him to do it, but he did it. And that blessing of creation, of life, is an act of love. And then the sages note in this act of love, they say, what comes first? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Yes. The earth was without form and void. Darkness was on the face of the deep. So the first thing that's there is darkness. And then you begin a discussion. Does God create darkness? Was darkness already existing? Is darkness purely the absence of light? Where was God in the darkness, etc.? But they just note this: darkness comes first and then light. And so often that's a pattern that you see in the world. So often you see in the world where things go wrong before they go right. Sometimes people encounter bad before they encounter good. Not often do we encounter good first, and then everybody's super happy. And so the sages have a look at the pattern put in there at the beginning of the Bible, and they go, oh, we see that there is darkness and there is light. And there was a thing hovering, brooding over the water called the Spirit of God, or in Hebrew, Ruach Elohim. And the term Ruach Elohim occurs 96 times in the Hebrew Bible. And so there's already this thing called the Spirit. It's not called the Holy Spirit. That's a word that only is going to show up in the Second Temple period. It does occur 3 times in the Hebrew Bible, but Spirit of God already occurs 96 times. So why don't we just call it the Spirit of God? I hear you ask. Well, the sages go, who is the Spirit of God? What is the Spirit of God? Why is it brooding? And in the Midrash Rabbah, they actually have this one saying, the Spirit of God, that is the Spirit of the Messiah. They already have this idea that the Messiah is pre-existent. He exists before creation. In fact, he's the thing that's going to start creation. which is, of course, reflected in the New Testament. Nothing was made without him. Okay, and so you already see hints of it being expressed in Jewish exegesis as they're looking at the text, just seeing sentences that have no explanation. The Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Doesn't tell you why, doesn't tell you for how often, doesn't tell you what it wanted to do with it. It just is there. And then because it's there, you've got to talk, you've got to reason with it. You've got to ask questions. You've got to dig deep. You've got to go from the bet, from the letter of the law, to try and find the spirit of the law, trying to find the words that are not written on the pages. It's not often what we would normally do when we read the Bible. Usually we just say, what does the text say? And that's it. As opposed to, what does the text say? And give me more, right? Demand from the Bible. This is what Jewish people are going to be doing if they're serious in their studies. From Simchat Torah, the joy of receiving the Torah, where they leap into a new year of study. So today, in Jewish tradition, they will read the first couple of chapters of Genesis, will actually conclude again, they'll reread the ending chapters of Deuteronomy again, begin with Genesis, and then the last thing they'll do is they will dance around the Torah, sing, hold it up, and call on the Messiah to come. That the goal, right? The goal of the Torah is to bring us to the Messiah and into the kingdom of heaven and into the Messianic age. Or as the New Testament reflect again as well, the goal of the Torah, the telos, is Christ, is Messiah itself. All right. So in the first chapter, the Jewish sages will note that the world was created by 10 utterances. So 10 times it says, Yomer Adonai, and God said, Ihyeh something, right? Let there be light, Ihyeh or let there be earth, Ihyeh Aretz. And these 10 utterances lead to another question. What would be a good question? Why does God say it 10 times? Why doesn't he just say it once, right? Let there be the world, and bang, it's all there. Why do you have to break down into 10 things? Why not just say one? And that's a good question. And there's probably really no right answer in any of the questions that we deal with. Remember, we're reaching into the text. We're trying to let it speak to us. We're asking questions, and we get some answers, but we might not be satisfied with them. So we're going to ask again. And they conclude that one conclusion, I should say, is that each of these 10 details is really important. Each point is meaningful. God could have just said everything in one, and then we wouldn't have as much detail. We wouldn't know as much about God's characteristic if he had only said one. But because he said 10 things and created an order and a pattern that reflects something of his mystery, of his majesty, and something about his character, which is much better than if he just said one thing. You have 10 things, so it's got to be good. 10 also obviously is reflective of the 10 Commandments and a whole bunch of other 10s that appear throughout the text. The 10 righteous people, which would have saved Sodom and Gomorrah, but we couldn't find them. The idea of getting 10 men together in a minyan to pray to God, because that's actually the ultimate form of prayer is when 10 righteous people get together and start praying in unity. The 10 Commandments, of course, where God gives us 10 rules, the big 10, so to speak. And there's a whole lot of others, but those are reflected in the 10 Commandments. So God creates the world, and as afterwards he creates man, and he makes man in his own image, which is a very interesting thing to say, because what does it actually mean to create a human which has form in the image of something which doesn't have form? How can that possibly be? Great question. Do I have an answer? Absolutely not. But the Jewish people reflect on this as well, and they say, well, maybe at the beginning of creation, maybe maybe humans were actually really like God in the effect that they were beings of light. And that when God clothed them in skin, as we're going to read in Genesis 2, maybe that's what this is, as opposed to some other traditions. It's just a reading. Don't take the words out of my mouth and say, oh my gosh, this is biblical truth. They're reflecting on the text and they're asking questions. God says in the beginning, let there be light, except that he hasn't made the sun and the moon until day 4, which means what really is the biblical meaning of light? It can't possibly mean that light, right? This little light behind me gives light onto my notes. It allows me to see you. When I go around the house at night, I turn the light on and it chases away the darkness. Absolutely. But this light cannot distinguish good from evil. It has the inability to do that. This light can give light to my family, to myself, to work that I'm doing, but it also gives the exact same amount of light to the thief that comes in to steal. It cannot suddenly turn off and go, oh, bad guys around, bad man, you get no light. It cannot distinguish good from evil. But God's light is different. God's light is not a natural light. God's light is himself. It comes from him, and it's something that he spoke into being. Does that mean there was no light where God was? That's a very good question, and the sages will have lots of discussions about that. But God creates light, and then he moves it. He's the one that creates the evening and the morning. There is no sun or the moon to start that pattern. That's going to take until day 4. So for the first 3 days, how Trinitarian, how interesting that pattern of 3 is. For the first 3 days, God is going to make time himself. He is going to move light, and when he moves light, what's left is darkness. So does God make darkness? You could say he does by moving light, but he himself doesn't say, let there be darkness. He says, let there be light. So you create this, this interesting paradox where by creating light and moving it, there is this thing now called darkness. When God says of the world, this is good at the end of every day, by the very action that he says something is good, he must know what is not good. So the question is, does God make things that are not good? No, he only makes good. But by creating something called good, you have by definition understood that there's something out there that is not good. What is that? These are some deep philosophical thoughts that just appear from the first pages of scripture that make us ponder the very aspects of creation. Good, evil, male, female, light and darkness, heaven and earth. All of things in creation are all made in couples. They're all made in a pair. And you can't understand one without the other. If we didn't have men in the world and it was just populated by women, well, you wouldn't know what a woman was. In fact, today, people still don't know what women are. Same with men. If you had just a world of men, men wouldn't know what it was to be a man, because you wouldn't have something that would help you define yourself by being other. And so we often you need a darkness to know what light is. You need light to know what a darkness is. And the same goes with good and evil, which will be reflected by the prophets, and sometimes perhaps gives a little hint to the answer of why in Isaiah it says, I, the Lord, make peace, shalom, and Ra bad. All right. So God creates man, and then he gives them the very first commandment, which is go forth and multiply. That's the first commandment that's ever recorded in the Bible. And we're to multiply. And unfortunately, as you see in the world, we're slowing down. We are not keeping up with that commandment, and the world is stopping. Why are we stopping? Good question. for another topic. All right. Just to slowly wrap this up, just a few opening words. There's a lot more to go, but in chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, those are the verses that are read every single Sabbath. Every time you have Shabbat, every time a Jewish family gets together and actually celebrates Shabbat, or some Christian families for that matter, part of the liturgy, part of the rhythm of prayer is you read Genesis 2, verses 1 to 3, which says, "Thus the heavens and the earth and all the hosts thereof, they're finished. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done. He rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done." So God rests, which is a very interesting concept. What does it mean for God to rest? Does that imply God got tired? What is he doing? But if you're trying to imitate God, to rest is also to be God-like. Right? Sometimes we don't think of that. Sometimes we think of being creative is godlike, but being loving is godlike, being proactive is godlike. Yes, all of those things true, but so also is resting. So there is this importance of incorporating in your life the ability to take some time to rest. Not the majority of your time, but a portion of it. In verse 3, then God blessed the seventh day and he called it holy. So the first thing that is called holy in the Bible is time. It's the Sabbath. Everything else is called good. But there's something special about this day. And why? Because God rested from all his work which God had created and made. Or in some translations, which God has created for its own reproduction or its own continuing. Because the Hebrew reflects that God sets something in motion. So after he created the world, then the world is just doing its thing. It's, the world always creates a balance. We're often in a world where we're terrified of the future, ice ages, global warming, running out of minerals, all those kinds of things. And yet the first chapters of the Bible say, look, relax. God created the world. Everything has been set up for it to work. The world is the right distance from the sun, so you have seasons. It's the right angle, so you have the northern and southern hemisphere and the way the winds work around the world. It has a hydrological cycle where the rains fall and come down. And it all just, it fits. You have trees that eat carbon dioxide and produce oxygen. You have the right amount of oxygen. So if there's too much oxygen on the planet, it would erupt into flames and fire would never stop. If you didn't have enough oxygen, we'd all die. And so it's got the right amount somehow. It's called the anthropic principle. You don't have to believe me. You can look that word up. Okay, the anthropic principle, which means that the world is uniquely designed to support human life. It is a super intelligence, which is reflected here. And you read these sentences every week. Every week you sit down and go, wow, God has created this world and it just works. For that, we're truly thankful. In chapter 2, you get the details about how Adam and Eve, the first humans, come together is really good. You get in the Bible, you have one verse of how you make a man and 6 verses in how you make a woman. Okay, which describes either women are just more complicated or there's something special about this addition to the human family or the creation of a human family. And God says that he makes first he makes a garden, or he makes Adam and he puts him in a garden. In verse 8 of chapter 2, it says, and God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and that is there he put the man, or Adam, that he had made. So Adam is not made in the garden. He's made outside the garden. Eve is made inside the garden. Adam is made from earth, the material of the world, and Eve is made from material from man, which is interesting. And yet then from woman comes every man, right? It's a very interesting little piece of not irony, but but it is ironic. In verse 8, it says, God planted a garden, okay, eastward, Mikedem. which sometimes can be also translated as ancient or before. So there is a Jewish tradition based on this verse that the Garden of Eden was actually created before creation. Although Mikedem can also mean a direction. And so there's a discussion, where is Eden? Where is Eden? Is it in Iraq, as some people say, around close to Nineveh? Where is it? Is it in Turkey? The Yemenites in Yemen will say it's in Yemen because their capital is Aden, which is a reflection of Eden. So they have this idea that it's there. But if you have a look at verse 10, it says, now a river went out of Eden to water the garden. So the river went from Eden to the garden. So where exactly is Eden, I hear you ask? Well, good question. It's not 100% clear. Jewish tradition is that it's sitting in Jerusalem, right? And that the actual where God puts his temple is where the Garden of Eden is. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to believe that tradition or anything like that. When you go to Jerusalem and you visit around, there is one river that springs out from underneath the Temple Mountain from a spring. It's called the Gihon, which is one of the 4 rivers that are named here coming from Eden. So there is this tradition that the Temple Mountain is the Garden of Eden, possibly. Last thing, when God makes a woman, he says, it's not good that Adam's alone. And so loneliness is not something we should be enjoying. It's not something that we should acknowledge is a good thing of creation. Even God is not alone. He is a unity. He is there with the Father, the Son, and the Spirit in a special relationship. For Adam, he makes Adam and God says himself, this is something that's not good. The first thing that's not good is it's not good to be alone. And so he makes a woman. And he says in verse 18, I will make a woman, Ezer Kenegdo, which we often translate as helper or helpmate from the word Ezer. But we so often don't translate the Kenegdo, which literally means opposite him or in opposition to him. Why? There's a reflection on these words by the sages where they would say that a woman is not a doormat. She's not a servant. God didn't create a woman so that man can boss her around. And so what is she doing? She's a helper, but sometimes she has to oppose some of the things that he does. What does that mean? Sometimes the most helpful thing that a woman can say is, honey, that's not very intelligent. That's actually kind of dumb. And if you keep going in this direction, it's going to hurt. She can actually give some helpful information by actually saying the opposite. That can be quite helpful. And so Jewish sages, they wrestle with this and they say, when is a woman a helper and when is she actually opposite? They say, well, if a guy is obeying the Lord and doing right, she's a helper. But if he's opposite God, if he's going away from God, then she'll oppose him and bring him back. And that is a very helpful thing to do. And so the relationship is one that is sometimes as human relationships go, can be challenging, but at the same time, an incredible blessing, because the opposite is loneliness, and that's something that God says, hang on, this is perhaps not good for humans. So we get this idea of couples that are made, and human families begin. And so Genesis starts with God creating the world, setting everything up, and making it just right for human flourishing. Things will go wrong. We'll talk about those next time. But thank you very much for joining. I hope that your Simchat Torah, your new cycle of the Bible is fruitful, is helpful, and a great blessing to you all. Thanks for listening.